Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Hockey Writers Live. And you'll notice here, it's not just me and Josh this week. We decided to bring on a whole panel of draft experts for you. So Josh Bell, welcome back.
Good to be here, as always.
And we got two other people here. So we've got all of our rankers from the Hockey Writers. So if you've been paying attention to our draft guide this year, reading our profiles, these are the three guys that legitimately do all of our rankings. So Larry Fisher, welcome.
Thanks for having me, guys. Looking forward to recapping the draft and talking all types of prospects.
Oh, absolutely. And Andrew Forbes, welcome.
Hey guys, thanks for having me on. Mark, I think you're giving me too much credit as a draft expert, but I'll take it.
Oh, listen, well, the work that the three of you do is just simply incredible. I mean, from the beginning of the draft year all the way through, and especially longer this year with 2020 and the pandemic, just yeoman's work, just doing monthly rankings. And I know people ask all the time about, where can I get like really good rankings? And the three of you just do yeoman's work. So thank you for that. And thank you for joining us tonight. We really do appreciate it. So let's just jump right into this. Josh Bell, we just had 7 rounds, 217 picks, and it felt like it took 20 hours. Yeah. What is the big takeaway that you have for this 2020 draft now that it's all said and done?
Besides it being so long, it's kind of crazy the number of players we saw fall. There's a lot of players that people thought would go in the first round or first couple rounds that we saw go in the 6th, 7th, even undrafted. So it's kind of crazy, especially when you factor in their size. I think size played a big impact this year, and yeah, there's definitely lots to take away though.
Yeah, for me, size was a big thing. I think a lot of birthdays had a lot to do with it. I noticed a lot of late birthdays, couple picks as well, a couple overagers went really high as well. So I think that, having more information on a player certainly had its advantages, and also those that are playing in a league already had its advantages too, to be able to see if they've made any steady improvement. Larry, what did you take away from this draft?
Yeah, you guys hit most of the same points I was going with. The size factor, which tends to happen on a regular basis at the draft. Smaller players tend to slide and fall. And one of my guys I had ranked as a first round talent didn't go until the 7th round. So again, smaller players. As you mentioned, the overagers was a big takeaway. We've seen an overager in the top 20 or in the first round, and then a couple right at the end of the 2nd round too. And they were more overagers than I expected. But again, I think with those overagers have been seen in a playoff environment before too, which I think helped them from last season's playoffs. There wasn't a playoffs this year. So I think the overagers got a bump and the small players got bumped down as a result.
Do you think we're ever going to get to a point where we're going to finally get over the hump about small players? Like, is this going to be a thing that continuously follows the league? Is that going to be the trend? Or are we finally starting to see a little bit of a shift to some of the smaller players maybe going higher?
Well, you see what Braden Point did in the Stanley Cup playoffs. I mean, he got my vote as the Conn Smythe winner. You look at the amount of overtime goals he scored, the amount of game opened the scoring several times. He was a real clutch guy for Tampa. So I thought you look at some of those guys like Zion Nybeck and Sean Farrell and some of those guys that you'd think, my guy Alexander Passion, you think some of those guys might get a bump up thanks to Braden Point's playoff performance. But still, at the end of the day, size seems to rule the NHL draft. And I think a big reason for that is you got that package, that frame to work with, right? You can build in the tools and improve certain things with a bigger body, where the small guy always has to overcome the size. And that's something that scouts at the NHL level, they'll take a big body that they can work with and develop over a guy who they can't force somebody to grow taller. And that's just a reality, unfortunately, for the small players come the NHL draft.
Exactly right. Andrew, what'd you take away from this draft?
Yeah, I think, like Larry said, I think you guys nailed it mostly on the head. I think a big thing was that some of these players got a chance to get their season underway, which helped, a fair amount of these guys kind of move up in the draft. And going off of what Josh said, you saw a lot of guys kind of move down, in big ways. One guy that comes to mind is Martin Cromiak, fifth round pick, which I think all of us had him ranked in the first 2 rounds at least anyway. So those are some of the things that obviously you kind of look at and shrug your shoulders and say, it's one of those things you never saw coming. I know Igor Chainikov, obviously you being a Columbus writer and seeing that pick kind of shocked us all, but that's the fun part about the draft, is just getting to see those kind of things happen. And again, you just shrug your shoulders and shake it off and say, you know what, better luck to us analysts next year, and maybe we can get it right.
Listen, I'm done guessing after this year, because no matter how hard you try, we're not going to be able to figure Jarmo Kekalainen out. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But, Andrew, you mentioned Cromiak too. And I think this year, especially with it being a virtual draft, one thing that stood out to me was a lot of these prospects had cameras in their homes and they were with their families. And could you just imagine the agonizing wait that some of them had, and Cromiak especially, watching the NHL Network feed? I felt for him. A lot of people thought that he was going to go a lot earlier than he did, but then when his moment came, it had to have been like the weight of the world off of his shoulders. He finally heard his name called, and I just couldn't imagine, just having to wait it out, hoping that someone was going to call the name.
Well, him and you think back to even in the first round, Hendrickson Pierre waited till the 22nd pick before the Capitals finally called him, and he's sitting next door to one of his teammates and he's getting called. And it's just one of those moments, right? Like those are the stories that you kind of look back on with the draft and you can laugh about later, especially if, you take, hey, I fell in the draft. I'm 22nd overall. I'm going to make it worth it and make all the teams that passed on me kind of look back and remember who I was, 10 years down the road. So that's the fun part about the draft.
So I'll throw a question to all of you at this point. It's a great segue by Andrew. I kind of made a joke tweet the other night in the first round. I'm eager to see the Cole Perfetti and the Marco Rossi revenge tour, because both of them kind of fell a little bit. So I wanted to ask you, we'll start with Larry. Larry, who's the player in this draft that is, like Andrew says, going to be the guy that probably has the biggest chip on his shoulder now and is going to start to prove everybody wrong?
Oh, that's a good question. And there's a lot of them right there. We talked about the amount of fallers. You look at a guy like a Zion Nyback in Sweden, who had a record-setting year at the junior level, and he's going to get to prove himself now at the pro level. And I think he's one of those guys that is really going to have a chip on his shoulder. I think the guy that I had as a first-round talent, Alexander Kash, and going in the 7th round, I think the talent's there. He was a younger player for this draft class, late July birth date. I think if he puts on some lower body strength and becomes a little more explosive with his skating, he's a guy that I think we're going to look back in a couple of years and just giggle that he was a 7th round pick for the Carolina Hurricanes. So again, we're talking smaller guys, but those are two guys that come to mind for me that fell way too far for my liking, and surprised that they were on the board certainly outside of the top 3 rounds.
Mm-hmm. Andrew, who do you say?
I don't even think you have to go that far. I think looking in the 2nd round, and a guy like Jan Mysak, who, definitely has the 1st round talent, but there's just some questions surrounding him going into the draft, and he only fell probably to 48th spot. So I think it's a good pickup by Montreal, and even a guy like Noel Gunler, who just fell outside of the 1st round. I mean, that's a guy that some people had in their 1st round, and dropping off to that point. It's a guy that's going to say, hey, look, I wasn't a 1st round talent for these teams. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to show them what I do have. And I think that's the exciting part, is that you see these guys who do take that chip on their shoulder and they turn it into a pretty good NHL career. So that's what I'm looking forward to, is a couple of those players, even just in the 2nd round, who can come out and make a difference.
Yeah, Gunler was actually in my top 10 overall for a long time. He's got that kind of talent. I think that's a really good call on your part. Josh, who you got?
I'll mention 2 guys who haven't been brought up yet. Sean Farrell. So a lot of people had him right in the 1st or top of the 2nd. There's talk about him potentially being the top guy off that stacked Chicago Steel team, and he fell all the way to the 4th, end of the 4th round. We talked about size. He's 5'8", so maybe that kind of played a factor. But I think he's a guy who he's got that high competitiveness. So I can see him having a chip on his shoulder and wanting to prove some wrong. And The other guy here I had, and I can't remember who I was talking about.
I'll jump in real quick. Hendrickson Pierre is somebody who, you look at the injury history, it's valid, the concussions. He had the start to this season, but guy's a top 10, 15 pick if you ignore the injury, and he fell down to the mid-20s with Washington. I really feel like that he's going to have a lot to prove to show that he's over his injuries, and he certainly has the skill to do it. I think in a normal year, he probably would go like 10, 11, 12, something like that. So I would definitely watch out for him. I think Washington got a really good player out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Mark, I was just going to say also a guy to also think about is Antonio Strange is from London.
Yep.
Not only did he fall, as far down as Josh mentioned, Sean Farrell did, but Josh and I had this conversation on my podcast that, Antonio Strange has also got jumped by his teammate Luke Evangelista in London. So, I mean, that's something. Not only do you have one chip on your shoulder, but you've got two. So I think it's a solid pickup by Dallas late in the 4th round. And, he's got the talent to be there. It's just a matter of putting the whole, every piece together to make a career out of it.
Absolutely. And the last one that I'll give for now, someone who went at the end of the 1st round, I think could have easily went around the lottery, was a guy like Maverick Bork. I really think that Dallas landed somebody who's going to be an impact player in the league eventually. So
yeah, my other guy was Carter Savoie. So he went down at 100. He was one of my favorites in this draft. I had him, I think, up at 33. Just so much offensive talent. And I know there's some questions about his effort away from the puck and defensive, but down at 100, going to the Oilers, that's a pick I'll be watching.
Do you think the league had something to do with that he played in, Josh?
It could be at the AJHL. It might, it's kind of a step down from the dub, the O, the Q. So it might have a little bit, yeah.
Still a goal scorer, though. I mean, you can't deny the talent that's there. It's just not being able to do it against tougher competition. Yeah. You just wonder. I have to think that that's part of the reason why it happened like that.
It's possible, yeah. All the way to 100, though. That's a pretty steep fall.
Yep. So, guys, let's switch gears here. Let's actually jump into the 1st round a little bit. Let's kind of look at different situations of interest just to get your take. So, Andrew, we'll start with you on this one. Did the Los Angeles Kings get number 2 right in selecting Quinton Byfield?
I think so. Obviously, I think there was a lot of safe picks in that 1st round, and number 2, I think you were safe going either way, whether you go Stützle, whether you go, even Lucas Raymond. I mean, there were so many safe picks. But that being said, you're getting a guy who's got the size down the middle, and I think he's going to be ready just as Anze Kopitar kind of hits his decline in terms of his career, and it's the perfect fit for him. It's a little bit more quiet out in LA in terms of the fan base. You're not in kind of the central hub that we talk about in the big cities like Montreal, Toronto, even Buffalo, things like that. You're right in the hub cities, right? So to be able to kind of go to Los Angeles and play your game and figure it out down there and develop the way that you need to develop. He's got a lot of room to even grow more now. Like his ceiling is incredible. And the fact that he's got that time and the chance to develop in a program where, they've got some key centers. I think it's a great pick for them.
Yeah. So Josh, kind of turning to Ottawa, you knew that once Byfield went number 2, Tim Stützle was going to go number 3. Because the question now with them was they had the number 5 pick, and I think that there were some that were thinking that they were going to go with another forward. Maybe they were going to go with a defenseman like a Jamie Drysdale or the guy they ultimately took in Jake Sanderson. Do you agree with the way that they attacked the number 5 pick? Do you feel like that they should have taken Sanderson in that spot?
That's a tough one. I feel like that's a very positional need pick. So if you look at their roster, they've got a lot of those puck-moving defensemen, very offensive defensemen, and Sanderson can kind of bring that defensive game. He can one day probably be top 2 right there with Chabot, or even if he's top 4, he could be with Brandstrom. So I think it fits well. In terms of best player available, I'm not so sure. I think I probably would have gone with the second forward and Alexander Holtz probably. Even taking Cole Perfetti, Marco Rossi, I think they're better players. So this one might be in a redraft. I don't know if you'll see Sanderson there, but it does address a need for them. So we'll have to see how it plays out.
Yeah, kind of interesting with the defense that they have. Tyler Clevin went later too. That it's interesting because the defensemen that they're looking to get they're kind of bigger. Sanderson is the more in your face kind of style defenseman. Clevin's the same sort of way. I just wonder if, they acquired Matt Murray. So it looks like they're kind of doing a build from the back approach where they got the Stanley Cup winning goaltender, and now they're going to put some really good defensemen in front of him. So all of a sudden, you add a Stussel, you add a Sanderson. I really feel like Ottawa's onto something. Like at first, I really didn't think that was the right play. I thought they should have went for a second forward there, but kind of, now we're done with the draft and we're looking at, what they did here. I actually think they did a really good job. Larry, do you agree?
Yeah, I think they're building an NHL team, not a fantasy team. They're definitely building guys that are going to be plugged into the roster in roles. And I think Josh kind of touched on it too, but I think they're taking on the persona of their coach a bit too. DJ Smith, I think those are the kind of players DJ Smith would want on his team, especially a guy like Clevin, but as well as Sanderson. And like you said, you're building from the back end out. You look at that defense with Shabbat and Brandstrom and Bernard Docker and Lassie Thompson. Those guys are first-round picks as well. And you go up and down there, and then in 2 or 3 years, that's going to be one of the better blue lines in the league. And if Matt Murray rebounds to the form we know he's capable of, that we've seen at the World Cup of Hockey and elsewhere, I think he's a guy that can backstop that team. And certainly with Tim Stützle coming in at 3 and some of the forwards they already had in the system from recent drafts, I think that's a franchise that they couldn't really have went wrong at 3 and 5. Like Josh said, there was no real bad picks there. Did they get best player available? We'll see time will tell, but certainly they picked players, like I said, to build an NHL roster, not so much a fantasy team as far as who's going to put up the most points or produce the most offensively.
Mm-hmm. So Andrew, now Detroit at 4 was kind of a swing pick. I think a lot of people kind of pinned maybe Cole Perfetti or Marco Rossi in there. Instead, they go after the Swede Lucas Raymond. Do you agree with the way that they approached the number 4 pick?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned it before. I think we were all kind of steering that direction of Marco Rossi and Cole Perfetti because there was a lot of chatter that Steve Yzerman had some meetings and there had been some discussions in terms of who he might be looking at. But again, I mean, you're talking about you look at Josh's rankings and he's got his tiers and they're kind of lined up well, and you don't really have a bad pick in terms of those 3 to 10. You're kind of running with similar talents, just different positional needs. And I mean, obviously Detroit's a breeding ground for those European wingers, and I think he just fits the mold in terms of what this is going to be Yzerman's team, and we've seen what he can do and what he can build in Tampa, and that was his team that won. For him to go to Detroit now and draft a guy like Lucas Raymond, I think he just fits the mold in terms of what Detroit's done over the past, couple decades. Right. So yeah. I don't think it's a bad pick. I'm sure it did surprise a number of people, but you can never hurt yourself in drafting a legitimate left winger like that.
Yeah. In hindsight, to me, he was he was number 3 on my overall list. So to be able to grab him like that, to be able we're talking Detroit. They need forwards, they need defensemen, they need goaltending, they need everything and the kitchen sink. So to be able to get a guy like that who can fill the net, no issue with that pick whatsoever. Even though some people called it a curveball, I think it was a really solid, safe pick for them. Now, somebody that I think I'm really surprised that he went where he did, even in front of his teammate Marco Rossi, was Jack Quinn. So Josh, I ask you about Jack Quinn. Do you feel like the Buffaloes say, I know what the Sabres are thinking. They need somebody that on the wing that can fill the net next to Jack Eichel. Do you feel like they should have went in a different direction, or is Quinn the guy that can do the job?
I mean, if you want somebody who can score goals, he's the right guy, right? I mean, I'm definitely not as high on him as some others. I think I had him at 21 or 22. I'm not confident that he can drive a line himself, but going into Buffalo, he doesn't need to. He's got Eichel, he's got Dylan Cousins. So if he can go, and he might be more one of the older guys in this class, he might be more NHL ready than some others. So maybe not next year, but the year after, he might be able to step in. And imagining Eichel feeding him, he could be racking up the goals. So I think it makes sense for them. There's going to be some looking back at this at some point, I'm sure, but it does make sense.
Yeah. And moving on to Minnesota, and I'll tell you before I question this for Larry, I really think the Wild, especially early, did a really good job. Rossi fell into their lap with the way that the first round went. And then to get Kunishtetov later on, that's a heck of a center ice right there for future seasons. Do you feel like Minnesota was one of the big winners in your mind, Larry?
They definitely were. They were a top 3 performer in the draft overall for me. And like you said, I think their top 3 picks, they hit it out of the park. Starting with Marco Rossi, I think that was for them with their positional need for a center and with, Mikko Koivu moving on. I think that was kind of the no-brainer there. And they could have went with a guy like Anton Lundell, who's more of a two-way guy, but Rossi has that high offensive ceiling, and they need a high-octane offensive guy in Minnesota to really lead their offense. So I love the Rossi pick. And then to come right back with Marek Kuznetsov, I think, especially with Kirill Kaprizov knocking on the door. They have Hovanov coming as well, who took a big step last season. So I think the Russian factor is looking good in Minnesota. And then their third pick, Ryan O'Rourke, who Mark knows well, and Josh, all you guys know well from the OHL. But Ryan O'Rourke, a real character guy who I think a lot of people are talking about his character, his physical play, but I really think the offensive upside is being overlooked with Ryan O'Rourke because he didn't play on a great team. But what I've seen in the CHL Top Prospects game, the way he moved the puck and worked in transition, he really caught my eye repeatedly in that showcase. And I think for them to get Ryan O'Rourke with their third pick of the draft, hats off to Judd Brackett for a strong debut there in Minnesota. And it continued into the later rounds, but certainly 3 for 3 right off the bat.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's my steal of the draft was Ryan O'Rourke, and got to talk to him earlier in the year, got to talk to his head coach, John Dean. He's an old school defender. He's got a lot of Duncan Keith in him. He's nasty. He's in your face. And yes, a lot of people underrate his offense, but he was in the top prospects game for a reason. He can play both ends of the ice. And yes, he was on a rebuilding team, but he was named captain at age 17, and he just has that leadership quality. Like, everybody on that team rallied around that guy. I think the Wild actually got their future captain in Ryan O'Rourke, and that's why he's my steal of the draft, because he's just got that it factor that you really just can't quantify, but you just see that he has it. And he's going to bring people to the fight, and he's going to lift the Wild eventually onto bigger and better days. I think the Wild were definitely one of the biggest winners early on. So Andrew, looking at the Nashville Predators, they took the dive. They took the goaltender in Askarov. Do you agree with them going with that pick at that spot?
I love it. I'm actually pretty shocked that he fell outside of the top 10. I know there's a lot of talk of whether he makes it out of the top 10. Me personally, I had him ranked at number 10. But you're talking about a team where, Pekka Rinne is on his way down. UC Saros, he's got a lot of years of hockey ahead of him. I just don't know if it's in Nashville. But regardless, your goal right now is to have Askarov maybe in the NHL as a starter within 5 years. That said, you've got time, and you've got 2 goaltenders that are very capable of carrying your team for those 5 years until he's ready. But this is a franchise goaltender, and I'd be shocked if we don't look back on this and kind of joke about how he didn't go in the top 10, because in the end, I mean, to get a goaltender like that, it is franchise changing. We've seen it in Montreal. Obviously, they haven't had the rest of the team kind of buy into that system, and they haven't been able to win with Carey Price in net. But he's a guy that's won them games. When it comes down to a 1-goal hockey game, that Carey Price is going to get the job done for you. And I think Yaroslav Askarov is going to be in that same kind of book as Carey Price in being that franchise netminder. So with the 11th overall pick, I mean, how can you argue getting a future franchise goalie? Especially if you have the pieces in place to carry you until he's ready.
Especially in that defensive factory in Nashville too. If they're able to get both of those pieces together when Askarov is ready to go. That's a downright scary situation. So moving on to Florida. So Josh, Bill Zito had his first draft, and he brought on somebody in Anton Lundell, from Finland, who's going to learn from quite the Finn, and Alexander Barkov. I think at that point it was a very safe pick. I think it was the right pick. So for Florida's first round pick, do you agree that Lundell was the right fit for them?
Definitely. I mean, heading into the draft, I kind of thought Florida was going to go with a winger. But with Lundell falling, I had him up at, I think 7. With him falling to them, it was just definitely the right choice. He's a two-way centerman. I wouldn't say he's the same style as Barkov, but he's that kind of mold, where he's just so good at both ends of the ice. And yeah, I know Lundell, his idol, it was Barkov. So that's going to be an interesting storyline to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and Larry, I got a couple for you next. One player that you're definitely familiar with, and Seth Jarvis going to the Carolina Hurricanes, and then we'll talk about the Oilers after that. So just Carolina just seems, the Patrick Marleau deal turns into a guy that I think has some really fun, creative, high offensive upside. So just how good does Carolina have it in your mind, especially being able to add Jarvis into the fold?
Yeah, you're teeing me up with another draft winner, in my opinion, in the Carolina Hurricanes. Minnesota had a great draft, and I think Carolina might have had the best draft overall. But I look at Seth Jarvis as a guy who really does drive play from the wing. He's kind of got the Mitch Marner type ability to drive play off the wing. Smaller guy, but a real offensive catalyst, and really exploded in the second half of the season for Portland. But certainly he plays with a lot of pace. He's an up-tempo guy, and I think Carolina could use a little bit of that. So I think they definitely took the best player available at that spot. And I know there were a lot of Edmonton fans had Jarvis on their short list going into the draft, and were disappointed to see him get scooped up one pick ahead of the Oilers. But certainly Seth Jarvis is going to be an offensive catalyst in the years to come for Carolina, and should be a good fit somewhere in their top 6.
Yeah, and speaking of the Oilers, right next door, because Jarvis went, they end up going with Dylan Holloway. Just what kind of a fit is that for the Oilers, and do you feel like that they made the right pick there?
Yeah, that was I think they picked a guy that they really feel is a good fit for the team. Again, I think not necessarily drafting by position, but just a guy that they think fits. They want a little more size up front, a guy who he's fast. I mean, he's one of the faster players in the draft, straight line speed. He's physical, and he's got a decent shot. He can finish. And I think maybe they see him, it sounds like they see him maybe more as a winger than a center. So he can be sort of that third line center, or possibly a top 6 winger. So it'll be interesting to see where they slot him, but certainly somebody they would have seen a lot of the previous season when he was developing in the AJHL, and a dominant force for the Okotoks Oilers. And it was interesting that their top 2 picks were both developed in the AJHL, with the hometown kid Carter Savoy going, I guess, at number 100. But yeah, so they got the 2 top guys from AJHL developed guys, but certainly Holloway, I think, is a guy that they could see on the wing in the top 6. But as a fallback option, he's a very solid third line center down the road, quite a projectable player.
Well, I'm coming up about halfway done through the show here at 8:30, so I just want to take a moment. If you're just joining in, this is episode 2 of the Hockey Writers Live. I'm Mark Scheig, joined by our 3 rankers for this year, my co-host Josh Bell, Larry Fisher, Andrew Forbes, and we're here talking about the NHL Draft and what just concluded. 7 rounds, 217 picks. We're just kind of going through the first round now, and then we'll have a few other questions for them. And then at the end here, around 9 o'clock, we're going to go ahead and we're going to ask about kind of how the offseason could go here, kind of a first preview of what you can expect starting on Friday. So, Andrew, kind of jumping back into it here with your team and the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I don't know about anybody else, but when they were on the clock, I was thinking they want a defender. They're going to get like a Braden Schneider or somebody like that. But no. Instead, they go after a really good forward in Rodion Amirov. So just your thoughts on that pick. Were you surprised that they didn't grab a defender, and just your thoughts on Amirov as a player?
Yeah, I think it's kind of going back to what I was saying with Detroit. And I think there was just a lot of talk about Braden Schneider being the guy that Toronto's going to be going after. Obviously, I had him ranked, I think, 25th or 27th. So later in the first round, but he was the right-handed shot that they need. And, like I said, I think we all got comfortable talking about Braden Schneider as a Toronto Maple Leaf, but, obviously Dubas likes to go off the map a little bit and play his game. And that's what he did with Amirov. And I don't have an issue with it. Obviously, we talk about positional needs versus best player in the draft. And I think Amirov was one of those guys that kind of fit into the one of the better players in the draft at that point in time. Obviously a winger that is willing to compete in the dirty areas. And he's the biggest thing too, is I think he's playing pro right now in the KHL. And that's one of the things that you'll see with a lot of Dubas's picks this year, was that there was a fair amount of them that are already playing in pro league. So, the transition might not be as difficult coming over to the NHL in terms of playing that pro level game. That said, I mean, anytime you get comfortable with what's expected of the team and then they go off the map, I think there is a little bit of that shock factor. I think he'll fit in well. And, I think Toronto's slowly moving to one of those European teams where a lot of their guys now, you got Barabanov, you got Korshkov, you've got, Ilya Mikheyev, like these guys, they're slowly moving into that Russian pool of players. And, it's so far so good with Mikheyev, the way he's playing. Korshkov's off to a great start this season. So it's definitely something that you'll keep an eye on. And I think Amirov is a solid pick for the Maple Leafs.
And I was joking with Andrew before we were gone in the air here about what is it with the Leafs and taking 6-1 and under players. And it's an interesting trend that they've started.
Well, it's like I mentioned, I think it's the Mitch Marner mentality, right? If you can get a player with that high talent, the biggest thing is the compete level. You mentioned it earlier in the show, and what is it with size being a factor still? And I think Toronto's trying to take that factor out of it. But it's still hard to believe when you got a guy like Dubas saying, they want to get tougher, they want to be harder to play against. You're going to have to pick up those bigger guys that are strong on their legs and have those, man-sized running back quads that are going to get the job done for you and be hard to knock off the puck. If you can get a guy that's, under 6'1" that can do that, great. I think we saw a little bit with Robertson. He was tough to knock off the puck in the playoffs, and it'll be interesting to see how these smaller guys do going forward.
So I got a question for all of you now. We knew that Sanderson and Drysdale were probably going to be the first two defensemen that were going to come off the board. And then there's an obvious question about who was going to be the third defenseman to come off the board. And Montreal said, well, we're going to take Caden Gooley. So, Josh, if they were going to take a defenseman there, do you feel like that Gooley was the third best defenseman on your rankings?
On mine, he wasn't. No, I had Emile Andre. But again, like we've talked about a lot, it's become kind of a theme. He's a little bit smaller, so he dropped down into the second round. But I kind of figured it'd be Caden Gooley. There's definitely a lot of talk about him. He was high up on Sportsnet and TSN's rankings, so I had a feeling he'd be the third one gone.
Larry, do you agree?
Yeah, I thought it'd be one of the two WHL guys, whether it was Gooley or Schneider. As Andrew alluded to, I think a lot of arrows were pointing Schneider to Toronto, just putting together the puzzle with the right-handed right shot, and usually right shot defensemen are pretty coveted, so I thought he would be in the mix. Caden Gooley as well, and the one that was kind of a wild card for me, who did go in the first round but remained my third ranked defenseman, was Justin Barron. I think he has the upside to overcome his injuries and still be the third best defenseman in this draft class. So I wasn't surprised that Justin Barron stayed in the first round. And for me, I thought he could have potentially even cracked that top 20 and maintained his standing as the third best defenseman in the draft class.
Yeah. And an interesting team that had 3 first-round picks at number 7, at number 18, number 20, was the New Jersey Devils. And I think with the first 2 picks, Alexander Holtz and Dawson Mercer, I think they knocked it out of the park with those 2 picks. But then with number 20, they decided to take Shakir Mukhamadullin. So I ask you, Andrew, were you surprised, like me and like a lot of other experts out there, that they decided to take him as a defenseman at that spot, 20th overall.
I was. Part of me thinks it was just a headline maker. Hey, we got 3 first-round picks. What can we do with it? But no, I was sitting there watching the draft and scrolling through my own rankings, wondering where the heck I had ranked Mukmadulin. But I think it's, again, it goes down to, what kind of scouts that the Devils had out there watching him play, and maybe he fit into the mold and fit into their system better. And that's just the way that it was for them. I don't think I'm going to be the only one that says I'm shocked by the pick, but I think he's a guy that they could have gotten later in the draft. That being said, they obviously had their guy, their mind made up on who they wanted to take and got him. So, kudos to them for making that pick. If it works out, and if it doesn't, then, the 4 of us will be sitting here in 5-6 years talking about what a terrible pick it was in the first round. So,
Josh, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think he's one of the more divisive guys in this class. You saw some people have him maybe at the end of the first and top of the second. I had him down in the 5th. And I think this comes down to the views. So obviously you can't watch every game. People only watch certain games through the year. And from what I saw, I definitely wasn't sold on him. I kind of question his hockey IQ, is the decisions he makes with the puck. But I know some others feel pretty confident with his smarts and with what his decisions. So I kind of have a feeling he's inconsistent. But obviously the Devils liked him and they took him at 20. I was surprised, though. I didn't expect them to go with Shakir.
Larry, how surprised were you?
Surprising with the selection, but as far as going for the home run there, he's a guy that I would be willing to swing on. Maybe not at 20th overall, but I was higher on him. The showcase events, I thought he showed really well. I thought he was good at the Holinka. I thought he was really good at the World Junior A Challenge, scored the overtime winning goal there with a big bomb from the point. He had strong showings where a lot of scouts were watching, and he was one of those prospects that started this season really strong, or at least was producing, putting up points in the KHL, which obviously caught the eye of the Devils. And I think I'm sure they weren't the only team who had him in, let's say, the top 40 or closer to the top 30. But so as far as going for that home run, I didn't mind the swing on Shakir. I think he's one of the bigger hitters in the draft class, potentially one of the bigger shooters as a defenseman. Caden Gooley has a bomb as well, but I think Shakir's got a wicked shot, big shoot, big shot, big hitter, and big raw upside. But like Josh said, there's some red flags with that player too, which is why a lot of people had ranked him more cautiously or shied away from having him anywhere near the first round in their rankings. But as far as a home run goes, he'd be a guy that's worth swinging on, in my opinion.
Yeah. Speaking of shocking, I'll ask the 3 of you this simple question, and then I'll get into some detail about it. But Yegor Chinakhov, when you first saw and heard that name, I just want to know, we'll start with Andrew. What was your reaction when that was the pick? Just first reaction.
I was shocked. I wrote his draft profile for the Hockey Writers, and it kind of blew my mind that he was a first round pick. But I mean, like Mark, I've met up with you at the Combine for the last 5-6 years, and you and I have talked about Jarmo Kekalainen and what he brings to that hockey club. And I mean, he doesn't make that pick without doing his homework. And Larry mentioned it earlier in the show, and overagers were kind of a theme following that pick. And I think he makes that pick knowing darn well what he's getting. If he doesn't know what piece he's getting in Chinakhov, I don't think he makes that pick at 21. I think a lot of people were surprised because there's no conversation surrounding him, going at anywhere close to the first round. Mm-hmm. So with that said, I mean, he's had decent performances internationally, and I think that plays a role in where he went. But again, I think it comes down to scouting and having the right people in the right places. And that's why you see the Leafs making picks out of Europe mostly right now, is because they've got a lot of great scouting out there. They have some guys that basically live over in Europe right now trying to scout these guys. So I think if you have the right scouts in the right places, you're going to find those diamonds in the rough, and maybe that's where the first round pick to you.
Yep. Josh, initial reaction to the Chinakhov pick?
My first thought was they're drafting him because he's got 5 goals in 5 games in this season KHL. Obviously, that's not true, and they had him in their top 10, which I kind of can't believe. But obviously, they see something that is going to make a lot of people go back and check him out. I didn't even have him ranked. I did my top 155, but he's definitely a player that I'm going to have to go back and watch and see what I missed on that one. But it's definitely a surprise for me.
Larry, the initial reaction to the Chinakhov pick?
Yeah, that was the shocker for me of the first round. Shakira, it was surprising but not shocking. Yegor Chinakhov was the shocker. I did have him ranked in the 6th round, and I do like the player. I had him ranked last year for the 2019 draft, had him mocked both years, but as we said, nowhere near the first round. And I think the hot start in the KHL certainly helped his cause, but in general, I think, like you guys said, Columbus is a team that does their homework, and they knew more than just the stat line in the KHL. But certainly for me, that was the real shocker of the first round to see Chinakhov go there, especially when a guy like Hendrickson Pierre was still on the board, who to me seemed like a perfect 1-2 punch with Pierre-Luc Dubois in Columbus.
Yeah. So let's address this situation, covering the Columbus Blue Jackets. When that pick first came down, I was literally floored because I had nothing prepared. I had all my papers, I had everything in front of me, thinking, okay, Hendrickson Pierre, Connor Zary, Tyson Forster, Jacob Perreault, they were all available in that spot. And they would have made great sense for the Blue Jackets because they would have each added something different skill-wise. And then they say that name, and I noticed we didn't even have a profile for him. Like, what is going on here? Like, even Ryan Kennedy, the great prospect writer for the Hockey News, he didn't even know who he was. So we were not alone in this. And Corey Prominent from The Athletic, actually, before he wrote his summary about the pick, he actually had to go back and do homework on it. So the fact that it caught virtually everybody off guard, I know a couple people were tipped off that this could possibly happen. Listen, I had never heard of the player before. I mean, I'm just going to be honest about it. Was definitely not prepared for it. I'm definitely not going to guess anymore because Jarmo doesn't really care about what the consensus rankers think about lists and stuff like that. They go off their own list. He's watched that player for the last year plus. So being able to go to a lot of his games, seeing his tendencies. In fact, he quoted time on ice to us in the media availability afterward. So there's definitely something there. And I know that I'm definitely not going to judge this one way or the other, but I'm going to take my time. I'm going to really pay attention to him in the KHL. Obviously, the thing that jumps out about him is his shot. Scored some real pretty goals to start out, the 5 goals in the 5 games so far. He's only got the 1 year left in the KHL. They believe in him, and that's the point. So no matter what the consensus thought, they're going to go off of their own list, and they were going to just go after it and go after him. And they didn't care about, they tried to trade down. We asked him about that. Did he consider doing that? He actually said that he was afraid to do it because there were a couple of other teams that may have had him in a similar range, like 28th overall or possibly at the end of the first round. So they explored that possibility, but they really wanted this player. Similar situation happened in the Dubois draft at the top, where everyone thought it was going to be Jesse Puljujärvi, but he pulled a fast one and did Pierre-Luc Dubois instead. It just shows that they'll do their thing because they believe in their scouting staff. So at this point, given how much they've hit recently, they deserve the benefit of the doubt. And let's give it a couple years to see how he pans out. And if he turns out to be a really good player, it's going to make a lot of us look silly. And it's not the first time he's done that. So it's not rush to judge it. Let's let it play out. Let's see where it goes from there. So with that said, Hendrickson Pierre is somebody that, I thought the Columbus Blue Jackets were going to go after him, but he goes next door to the Washington Capitals at 22. So Josh, do you feel like that the injury history was enough that's what scared some teams off? Like, how high did you actually have him, and how good of a player is the Washington Capitals getting?
I think I had him in kind of mid-20s. I had a hard time with him because I think he had, even before The injuries, I think he was not really in the game that we've seen. So I had him a little lower, but it's definitely the injuries that kept him that far. But we saw what he did last year in the Hlinka, and we've seen what he's done this year in the Q. Like, he's a very good player, high talent. I think he's one of the best playmakers in this class. So I think it's worth the gamble at 22 for the Capitals to grab him. You added McMichael last year, and look how that's turned out. I'd have a lot of faith in the Capitals with this pick.
So, Andrew, let's talk about Tyson Forster, somebody that me and you are very familiar with and watching in the OHL. I think he could be one of the leading goal scorers in the O moving forward here. But Philadelphia Flyers, it seems like that they've established a little bit of a pattern of drafting CHL talent and good CHL talent. Just how good of a fit do you think Forster is with the Flyers?
I think he's a great fit. I think going into the draft, the Flyers are looking for a little bit more forward depth, and they've over the past few years they've gotten a number of defensemen to add to their prospect pool, and guys coming up with Sanheim and Provorov and guys like that have really developed into legitimate NHL players. So I think going in, they needed that forward depth, and Forster has shown that innate ability to be a scorer, and that's kind of where they struggle a little bit. We saw it in the playoffs a little bit. They were able to get some scoring, but not an all around game from a lot of their forward depth. So I think that addition is big for them. They're going to see a huge jump in his production, so long as we get to see a little bit of hockey this year. But great awareness of a player that sees the game well, sees the gaps well, finds the scoring opportunities. Honestly, I think it was a great pick. I didn't have him ranked in my first round. That said, he could have easily jumped into the first round for a number of us, and I don't think that would have been any surprise. So for them to take him where they did, you can't. There's no fault there. I think he's going to be a legitimate scorer in the NHL and a solid right winger for them.
So, Larry, right after that, the Calgary Flames, I think, got a gift. I mean, Connor Zary's somebody that I had inside my top 20, and they were able to grab him at number 24. Just how good of a pick was that, and what kind of a player are the Calgary Flames getting in Zary?
Yeah, I got back-to-back hits there in my mock draft. I had Forster to Philadelphia, and I had Connor Zary to Calgary at 19. Calgary was able to trade down twice, pick up 2 additional third-round picks, and still get Connor Zary at 24. So that was a great pick for Calgary, and I know Connor Zary very well on the ice and decently off the ice from the Kelowna-Kamloops rivalry. And one thing about Connor Zary is he's a real gamer. We saw it at last year's under-18 Worlds. We saw it obviously in the tiebreaker game and in the playoff and the Kelowna-Kamloops series over the years. And he plays with a real swagger in the big games. He wants to be a difference maker. And him and Tyson Forster put on a pretty good show as line mates at the CHL Top Prospects game. So I think as far as what kind of role he'll probably be that middle six tweener center between could be like a Brian Little, Travis Zajac type guy sort of thing, I think. But he's got a bit more jam to his game. I think he'll be a good friend off the ice with a guy like Matthew Tkachuk. And I know Dylan Dubé really well, another kid who's got that sort of personality. And I think Connor Zary is going to fit in great with what Calgary's building for their young forward group with similar personality and similar swagger on the ice.
And Josh, is kind of going on here. Colorado decides to go defense, and they end up landing a guy in Justin Barron. Just how concerning is that injury situation, and what kind of a player are the Avalanche getting in him?
Going into the season last year, Barron was the number 2 guy behind Drysdale. There were people talking about him being even better than Drysdale. So the injury, obviously, the blood clot, obviously saw him fall quite a bit. It is a little bit concerning now that he's out indefinitely again. So I think they're going to be keeping a close eye on that. They probably even got the medical report to see what's going on with him. But I do think he has Larry mentioned it earlier, he does have the potential to be one of the top 2 defenders of this class. I think he just has so much skill. If he can kind of pick up where he was in the 2018-19 season and keep that development path going, then this could be a very, very good pick. And they've already got Makar and they got Byram last year. So that's there's potential for that to be very scary.
So we'll quick hit these last couple picks, and then we'll have a few questions at the end. So Larry, Jake Neighbors goes to the St. Louis Blues at 26th overall. So what kind of a player are they getting? And what kind of offensive upside do you see him having with the Blues?
Yeah, I think Jake Neighbors is a real character guy, he's got a decent shot. He's got decent wheels, but really what he's going to bring is sort of that middle six winger who's going to be just a solid go-to guy leadership wise, and certainly a big game guy, like almost like a Justin Williams type player come playoffs. I think he's got those similar traits. I don't think he's going to be an offensive game breaker or a one-shot scorer necessarily, but he's going to chip in offensively and bring a lot of leadership to the Blues, a nice middle six winger.
And Andrew, after that, the Ducks decided to, they got Jamie Drysdale early on, which I think was a wonderful pick. Great character guy, awesome skater, awesome offensive defenseman, getting better on the defensive end. They coupled that by adding a great offensive player in Jacob Perreault. Just how big is his offensive upside in your mind?
He's got a high ceiling. I mean, this is a guy who's easily probably top 5 in terms of his shot in the draft, and just an absolute sniper. I mean, I got a chance to watch his dad play for the Leafs for a number of years, and he was able to he had one heck of a shot. So I mean, he's obviously passed that down to Jacob, and I think the biggest questions with him are just his consistency in terms of his effort and his effort away from the puck. Obviously great offensive upside, but you want to see a guy kind of develop into that all-around player. And if he can do that, if he can put it all together, I mean, this is a solid pickup for them late in the first.
Yep. And Larry, going back to you, Ottawa, I mean, we talked earlier about Stussel and Sanderson going, but they had that third first rounder and they end up getting Ridley Grieg. Just what is Sanders fans, what can they expect from him?
He's a sandpaper type guy. Some people have called him kind of a poor man's Jonathan Toews, but the comparison that Craig Button made, which I think is a quality one, is Nazem Kadri. He plays that sort of edgy game, and he's been suspended quite a bit in the Western League for crossing the line at times, but he's a young guy, August birthday, lots of untapped offensive upside, but also plays on the edge and certainly brings a lot of two-way ability, but untapped offensive upside.
And Josh, we'll give you two here. 29 and 30. Brendan Bryson goes to the Vegas Golden Knights, 29th, and then another center, Maverick Bork, goes 30th to the Dallas Stars. Where did you have them in your rankings, and just kind of explain your ranking on them?
Yeah, so Brendan Berson, I think I had him just at the top of the second round. He was one that I could very much see hopping into the first. Bork fell quite a bit for me. I think I had him around 20. I might have actually been right at 20. But I really like both of these picks. It's kind of crazy. Vegas, seems like yesterday they weren't even in the league. And now not only do they have one of the best NHL rosters, but they have one of the best prospect pools too. And they are pretty consistently hitting the later picks. But this one at the end of the first, Berson, he could be a top 6 guy for them. That one-timer that we all saw at the World Junior A Challenge, that's it's going to be wonderful to see with Peyton Krebs. So I'm very, very much looking forward to see how he works out. And then Maverick Bork, I'm kind of surprised he fell this far. I thought he would go at least high 20s, but Dallas obviously jumped on it, and they've got a few nice pieces there, and they obviously just did pretty well in the playoffs. So it's a good pick for them, I think.
And Larry, to end the first round, a great feel-good story, especially with the way that pick was announced with Ozzy Weisblatt and Doug Wilson Jr. doing the sign language there to Weisblatt's mother. I mean, just incredible stuff. But the Sharks were able to recoup a first-round pick after giving theirs up to Ottawa. So what kind of a player are they getting with him?
He's another energy type player, almost like a Brendan Gallagher type winger. He can play with pace, but certainly chip in offensively and create a lot off the rush. But like you said, the thing with Ozzy Weisblatt is the story is so good. And you look at, obviously his mom is deaf, and there's a lot of boys, a lot of brothers, all with cool names in that family. And if you haven't read the Scott Cruikshank feature in The Athletic about the Weisblatt family, that alone is worth the subscription. To learn the history on that family is amazing. And just a feel-good story. And for me, one of the surprises of the draft was that 7 WHL players were taken in the first round. None in the top 10, but there were 7 WHLers, which seemed like a few higher than I had projected. So it was nice to see Ozzy Weisblatt close out the first round. And San Jose will have the book on him because they watched Noah Gregor closely help Prince Albert win the WHL championship 2 seasons ago. And Ozzy Weisblatt had a decent role on that team as a 16-year-old already. So San Jose's seen plenty of him. And I think a feel-good story and a surprising story that there were 7 WHL players picked in the first round.
All right, so let's kind of put a little bit of a wrap on the draft here. We'll go give you guys each a little bit of time. We'll start with Andrew. So 217 picks. I know it's kind of hard to say who wins or who loses in your mind here, but is there a team that really stood out that may have just won in your mind or maybe didn't do so well? Or is there a player or two that you nailed in your rankings or that you completely whiffed on? So I guess let's start with the teams. Do you have one winner and one loser in your mind out of this draft, the way it worked out?
Yeah, I think I've got 2 teams that kind of I would pick as legitimate winners here. I think LA got a number of solid picks to add to their already incredible prospect pool. Obviously, led by Byfield. I think that's a big pickup for them, and I think moving forward that's going to be something to watch. I also think, like Larry mentioned, Minnesota is a team that picked up some big players, some big names in this draft, and I think that's going to be good for them moving forward as well. In terms of big losers, I mean, right now I think it's a little bit too early to tell, but I'm just gonna say at this point, I think Buffalo for me. I just think they're doing things so Buffalo Sabres, and man, they got such a good fan base there. It's so hard to watch, and I talked about this on my podcast this week, and I don't blame Jack Eichel for potentially wanting out of Buffalo. I mean, this is a guy who's put his heart and soul, carried that team on his back, and he's got to be getting pretty sore. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he iced his back after every game these days. But for me right now, I don't think they did him a due service in drafting Quinn where they did. I think they could have gotten some better pieces in my mind.
Josh, quick winner or loser in your mind?
The biggest winner for me right now is Carolina. They're just up and down. I feel like they were just watching people fall and just scoop them up. I think San Jose also deserves a mention, at least the top half, even some of the guys in the bottom, but they got some really nice guys that their prospect pool desperately needed. They've high talent, high competitiveness guys. So they're definitely one I liked.
And Larry, what about you?
Yeah, I think we've mentioned most of them, but Carolina and Minnesota certainly stood out for me. Carolina probably, if I had to crown a winner, I'd probably echo Josh and go Carolina. 2 teams that haven't been mentioned that I thought drafted well were Dallas and also Vancouver. I thought Vancouver had some interesting selections. A guy like Yoni Yermo in the 3rd round could be a steal, and they had, even without Judd Brackett, I liked a couple of those Vancouver picks. And as far as losers go, Mark, I think like Andrew said, it's too early to talk losers because it'd be easy right now to come out and say Columbus. What were they thinking? Yegor Chinakhov where they took him, right? That would be the obvious. Let's call Columbus a loser. But when you look at that pick, and I don't want to put too much pressure on Yegor Chinakhov, but imagine if Artemi Panarin, who went undrafted as an overager, imagine if somebody took him at 20 instead they had him in the top 10, and look at him now, right? So there are some of these guys that develop at different ages and different times, and I just think let's talk losers 5 years from now, not 5 hours from the draft.
Exactly. Yep. Good call on that. So
Mark, can we pick Arizona for not having their 2nd round pick, or is that just a business side of things? That
listen, they did mess up, right? I mean, they'll obviously be a very interesting team to watch to see how they recoup stuff, but it's new management, so hopefully they turn things around. At least that's their goal. So, we'll start with Josh on this one. So, looking at your rankings now, is there a player, maybe not an obvious name, but you really nailed, like you really felt like that you got this right? And then is there a player, I know Chinakhov is an easy answer here, but is there a player that you completely missed on?
It's tough now. Like, so I kind of, my rankings, I I knew they weren't going to be a mock, so I wasn't kind of focused too much on the hits and misses. I did notice that Askarov went like exactly 11 and Forster went pretty close. There's a few guys in the first round that are definitely close, which is always usually a given. I think for misses, it's mainly the guys that we mentioned earlier that were falling, like the Nybeck, the Passions. I had Nybeck in my first round. I had Passion pretty high in my second. Sean Farrell was in my second round. So those smaller guys, Emile Andre, I had as my third defender, I think around 20 as well. So those smaller guys that fell kind of hurt me. But like I said, I didn't really rank on how I saw it mocking out. I just kind of ranked on how I saw their ceilings. So we'll have to revisit that one when we re-rank this.
Yeah, I'll just give one name that I missed on with Noel Gunler. I have him 10th overall. I mean, I love the skill. The questions were obvious, as I had a feeling that he was going to fall down to the second round, and that's what happened. But still believe in the talent, so we'll see. If they end up getting a steal out of that. Larry, which player did you really hit on, and which one do you feel like that you really missed on?
I got off to a pretty good start if you were comparing my rankings side by side with the NHL Draft. 14 of my top 15 went in the top 15. The only outlier was Seth Jarvis, who I had 17th and obviously went 13th. And the only guy that was left at after 15 within my top 15 was Hendrickson Pierre, who I had 14th. So through the top 15, I was doing really well. But one thing when you're a scout, you want to find players that you really believe in, and Yegor Chainikov is a prime example of who the Columbus Blue Jackets believe in. But for me, the two guys that I kept in the first round basically throughout the draft year and certainly from Christmas on were Yoni Yermo, who went in the third round to Vancouver, and Alexander Pashin, who went in the seventh round to Carolina. So those were the two that I knew probably weren't going 29 and 30th overall, but two guys that I believe in. And as a scout, you want to go to bat for certain prospects, and let's see where they are 3-5 years from now, whether, maybe they exceed expectations based on being third and seventh rounders. Because I do think they both had first round talent in my eyes and my viewings.
And Andrew, what about you?
I think one of my biggest misses has got to be Cromiak falling all the way to 128th. I mentioned it earlier. I had him ranked, I believe I had him ranked 44th. So, I mean, early second round, mid second round to fall to 128th. Not really sure what the story is there, but I do think it's a solid pickup. And I believe it was the Kings who grabbed him as well. So, I mean, I think he's a guy to watch, and he, like I mentioned earlier, he's a guy that's going to play with a chip on his shoulder now that he fell as far as he did. One guy that I'm going to go close to home for a guy that I'm going to stand by, like Larry was mentioning, was Luke Evangelista. I think in London, that system with the London Knights, they developed so well. They developed so many NHL stars, and he's definitely a guy to watch. He was off to a slow start last season, and then had a hat trick in one of his first 10 games. And that's kind of when he took off. And, obviously it helps playing with guys like Liam Foudy and, Connor McMichael, but he's a guy that undersized, but high ceiling in terms of what he can do offensively. So he went early second round, and I had him ranked 56th. So definitely another guy to keep an eye on, over the next 3 to 5 years.
And I'll just put a final bow on our draft talk here. So, obviously, the New York Rangers, I know they had the obvious pick in with Alexis Lafreniere. I mean, think about the Metropolitan Division, just how difficult that's going to be. Just how many top 3 picks has that division had? It's just insane, the amount of talent that just keeps going into there. Lafreniere, I know Dubois, Svechnikov. I mean, I can go on and on and on. Alexander Holtz is in that division now. So, they call it the Metro Heliton for a reason. The beat goes on there. But shout out to the Rangers. I mean, outside of doing Lafreniere, they ended up getting Braden Schneider, who I thought was the third best defenseman in this draft. They traded up to get him. And if that pick pans out, I mean, that rebuilds on a good course here. That's going to be a lot of fun. If they're able to put Lafreniere and Panarin together, that is just going to be so much fun. That's going to be must-see TV for the Rangers, and the league just absolutely has to love that, being in one of it in the biggest city in North America, to be able to have that kind of star and that kind of draw power. Also, shout out to Germany as well, to be able to get not only Stutzla but Lucas Reichel end up being drafted. I know Peterka went in the second round, but the German program, they're very much on the rise in the world. So kudos to them, and kudos to Quentin Byfield, for being the first Black to go as high as he did. Gets to join Akil Thomas, who's Black as well in Los Angeles. Just fantastic stuff there. So a lot of good stories out of there. I mean, we're not going to know for 3 to 5 years how it's going to pan out. So hopefully your team did well, and we'll revisit this. We'll see if we were right, if we were wrong, or whatever it might be. But we're going to end it here with just one more thing here, just after 9 o'clock again. If you're just joining us, this is the Hockey Writers Live. It's episode 2. I'm Mark Scheig, our co-host Josh Bell, and we have our resident rankers as well, and Larry Fisher and Andrew Forbes joining us here. So just one more thing before we wrap this show up. We're done with the draft. We've got the off season coming up here with free agency starting up on Friday. And I'll just give you guys each a couple minutes here. Larry, we'll start with you. Just what are you watching for as free agency gets underway? Just what storylines do you think that we should all be paying attention to?
I think with the COVID and with the pandemic, I think the short-term contracts potentially, instead of the 8-year deals for the big names, Alex Pietrangelo, Taylor Hall, I think we're going to see some of these guys bet on themselves and take a short-term, maybe even a realistic or a lower dollar value as well, and on a team that they really want to play for, and then go for the big money contract the following season or a couple summers from now. So I think the Marian Hossa type thing, where maybe there's some of these big name guys don't sign a long-term deal. There could be some short-term deals at pretty team-friendly contracts to try and take a run next season with some of the premier free agents.
Andrew, what are you looking for?
Yeah, kind of the same thing with Larry. I mean, I think you're going to see a lot of players taking shorter deals because they know the money's just not there over the next couple seasons with the flat cap. I think you see them sign for 1-2 years, and then you kind of see that you're going to see them make the money over the following seasons. But I think the biggest thing for me is watch the goalie movement throughout the offseason. We've already seen so many goalies change teams. Get used to seeing some of your old goalies in different unis this year, because nobody's going to be recognizable anymore. Lundqvist, Matt Murray, obviously going to Ottawa. I think Holtby's going to be in a different uni. So those things are definitely something to keep an eye on. And, just talking to Mark Masters of TSN, he's saying that the Leafs are going to have a big off season. So, I'm obviously going to try and stay on top of that, and we'll see what happens. They've already made one player deal. I think Janssen or Kerfoot could be on the move in Toronto. They've got a lot of young talent. You can almost pencil in Robertson for a roster spot next year. And that opens up a lot of potential moves for Dubas to make this offseason.
Yep. And Josh, what about you? What are you going to be looking for starting Friday?
I think the two things that have been mentioned, looking for the deals that people sign and the goalies are the two big ones. I think one big one, though, is what is the next season going to look like? So we talked about it last week about the potential of having the hybrid bubbles. You can go back and watch that on the Hockey Writers YouTube. But so it's already been pushed to January 1st, and we know that the Olympics are going to start July 22nd. So the time frame is getting shorter and shorter. We don't know how or when these guys are going to play. So it's going to get interesting. We're going to have lots of rumors and speculation, and probably little bits of news come out, just like we did for the draft and the playoffs. So that's definitely my top storyline right now.
Yeah, you guys mentioned the goalies. It's obvious. The buyout candidates, watch for Alexander Wenberg in Columbus possibly to get bought out. Just the dynamics are there. They just signed Max Domi to that new contract to be their number 2 center, and I'm just not sure that they want to pay Wenberg 3 more years and almost $5 million, to be a third or a fourth line center when they've got to sign Pierre-Luc Dubois and Vladislav Gavrikov and others, and they've got to create room somehow. So that's one thing. So just the different buyouts, because that deadline's coming up, at least the first window's coming up. And just that first domino is there's so many things that we could be looking for, speculation wise, right? Patrick Laine, Johnny Gaudreau, Sean Monahan, are they going to stay in Calgary? I mean, are teams going to be able to step up? I just think it's a big wait and see to see, because the qualifying deadline was today. So now teams have an idea of who's out there that is available from a market standpoint. So I think that some more trade talk is going to start to happen. Teams have to make decisions about the cap, like Tampa Bay, they've got to do some work, and Vegas and Marc-Andre Fleury, they've got to do some work. So there's stories all over the place. There's no shortage of them. That's what's going to make this just so wild. It's going to open up right after the draft like this on Friday. Signings can start to happen. Taylor Hall said he's willing to take a 1-year contract somewhere to go to a contender. Who's going to make room for him? It's just, there's so much to watch for. So no shortage of storylines. And guys, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us tonight. Like I said, these are our draft experts. They're the ones that do the rankings. They watch the prospects. Just fantastic work all around. Just make sure you follow them. All of them are out there on Twitter. And with our show too, we're still, our second episode here. We'll be back next week, Tuesday night, 8:00. We're going to do a off-season review. This point, I know me and Josh will be here, and we might have a special guest or two, and we'll announce that as we get to do that. So make sure you don't miss us. Go to our Facebook page, like that page. Go out to YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to it. We're going to be out here every week, producing content like this. So we want to connect with you, the hockey fans. So thank you all for joining us, guys. Thank you so much for this, and we really appreciate you joining.
Hey, thanks guys for having us on, and great job, both of you. Wonderful show, and just happy to be a part of it.
Yeah, hats off, guys, for getting the THW live show going. You guys are doing great as co-hosts, and again, congratulations on all the draft guide coverage and putting that together, Josh. And obviously, it's been a fun long draft year, and it'll be fun to turn the page to 2021 now. This was the draft year that never ended, it felt like, and it was also the draft that never ended today. So
I was gonna say
it's finally over.
Yeah, but Josh, great job with the draft guide. I mean, he's the mastermind of it. Everything that you saw in there, he put it together. So just good work, Josh. Thank you for all that, and thank you all for joining us. And we look forward to talking to you next week, 8:00 Eastern, episode 3. We will recap the off season. Until then, we'll see you later.